Hi, welcome. My name is Dr. Peter Nelson with Kettering Health Network, and today we're going to talk about sleep and how when we improve our sleep, everything in our lives gets better. Have you ever wondered, why do we sleep? We often hear about nutrition and exercise being really important for our health, and that's very true. Nutrition and exercise are good pillars of our health. But we really need to think about sleep is not just another third pillar. Sleep is the foundation. Every physiologic and mental part of our body improves when we get good, adequate sleep. Conversely, every part of our physiologic body gets worse if we do not get enough sleep. An important thing to think about sleep is every animal on Earth sleeps. When you think about what's important to an animal, finding food, finding shelter, and finding a mate, you might wonder, why are we created where 8 hours, a third of our life, is dedicated to sleep? So it has some profound importance to our health. Unfortunately, we live in a world that sometimes stigmatizes sleep. You've often heard the phrase, the early bird gets the worm. You might have been called lazy if you try to get a lot of sleep, or a party pooper for going to bed too early. Over the last 70 years, we've lost almost 25% of our sleep. The average American now sleeps only 6.5 hours a night, as opposed to almost 8 hours 70 years ago. And you might think, 6.5 hours, that's not too bad. But we're going to talk about the impact of cutting our sleep down to 6 to 6.5 hours a night. It's recommended, on average, we should be getting close to 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Before we get into the effects of sleep, first let's talk a little bit about the science of sleep. What actually happens when we sleep? When we're sleeping, our brain goes through these routine cycles. As we fall asleep, our brain drifts deeper and deeper into sleep. As you'll see on this graph, stages 3 and 4 is what we classify as deep sleep. And we cycle down into stages 3 and 4, or deep sleep, and then we cycle back into the red area, which is our REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, and then we cycle back down into deep sleep, and then cycle back into REM. So with the non-REM sleep, the black lines on the graph, this includes our deep sleep and really dominates the first half of our sleep. Thinking of our brain like a computer, non-REM sleep or deep sleep helps take our fresh memories from yesterday and move them to long-term memories. It's also important in energy restoration and cell healing. Your brain creates toxic chemicals when you're awake. When you're asleep, especially in those deep sleep stages, our brain opens up these drainage tunnels that help us get rid of all that toxic chemical buildup from the previous day. The last half of our sleep is heavy in REM sleep. Unlike deep sleep, which helps you form memories from yesterday, REM sleep is preparing the brain for tomorrow's memories. It's laying down the pathways so that your brain can take new information tomorrow and create memories with them. The REM sleep is also thought to be our emotional first aid. I like to think of this as like a rock tumbler in our brain. When something bad or tragic happens to us, like a loved one dying or something happening at work, that can be a really stressful, painful thing to think about. I like to think of that as a real sharp, jaggedy rock. And for a few days or weeks or months, that might be really emotionally painful to think about. But as we have more REM sleep, it's like putting that sharp, jaggedy rock in a rock tumbler, letting it wash around, and over weeks or months, that thought is no longer as painful to think about. So what happens when we get poor sleep? And when I say poor sleep, most of the studies refer to less than 6 to 6.5 hours. Poor sleep really affects everything in our body. So when you get poor sleep, that's connected with Alzheimer's disease. It's connected, as I mentioned, with the rock tumbler, worsening depression and anxiety. And when we get poor sleep, in general, we make worse decisions. Poor sleep also has a profound impact on how we metabolize our food. Poor sleep triggers insulin resistance, which is a driver of diabetes. It's really interesting. When you get poor sleep, when you exercise, you're less likely to burn fat and more likely to burn muscle. Also, it's been shown when you go on a diet, you're more likely to actually lose muscle weight and not necessarily fat weight. So getting better sleep improves our exercise as well as makes our diets more effective. Poor sleep also has a profound impact on our hormones. So for women, changes in menstrual cycle can happen. And for men, lower testosterone and smaller testicles, as well as decreased sex drive. There's lots of studies connecting poor sleep with worsening cancer outcomes. Poor sleep has been linked to increased bowel, prostate, and breast cancer, and the World Health Organization's actually labeled working night shift as a probable carcinogen. In an interesting animal study, they took identical mice with identical cancers and sleep-deprived half of them. The mice that were sleep-deprived ended up having much larger cancers and were much more likely to have metastasized cancer. Poor sleep also worsens our immune function. An interesting study related to our immune function is really relevant in today's world of COVID vaccines. It's been shown when you get a vaccine after a poor night's sleep, you produce only about half the amount of antibodies that you would if you had had a proper night's sleep the night before. And the amount of antibodies continues to be low even a month later compared to someone that had a better night's sleep. So your night's sleep prior to your vaccination may have more effect on the vaccine than you think. There's a big connection between poor sleep and our heart health. When you chronically have poor sleep, heart disease and calcification of our arteries increases dramatically. It worsens our blood pressure, and a really interesting study looked at those couple days right after daylight savings time in the spring. So across the country, we all lose an hour of sleep and we go to work slightly sleep deprived. The day after daylight savings time, that Monday, there was an increased risk of heart attacks by 24%. And the opposite happened in the fall. When we all got an extra hour of sleep, it actually decreased heart attacks by about 20%. So even just one night poor sleep can dramatically increase our risk for heart attacks. One last interesting thing that happens when we get poor sleep. One study took a bunch of healthy adults, no medical problems, and mildly sleep deprived them for only 1 week, 6 hours a night. And what they found was 3% of their genes were changed. So just over 700 genes. And our genes in our body can be turned on, so they're more active, or they can be turned off, so they're less active. The genes that turned off all related to our immune function. It decreased how well our immune function worked. And the genes that turned up and really increased production were either related to tumor production, so we were more likely to increase tumor production. It increased inflammation, and again, increased cardiovascular stress. So again, just 1 week of poor sleep is changing how our genes work in our body. And the last effect of poor sleep relates to accidents in driving. So you'll see on that graph, if you have a sleep of less than 4 hours, your likelihood for a car accident goes up almost 12 times. This isn't what you might think of you drifting off, falling asleep, and driving into the wall. What they think happened is actually you have what are called microsleeps. Your brain, just for a split second, turns off. You might not even think you're falling asleep. You might not think you're even closing your eyes. But your brain shuts off just for a second. And in that second, it's enough time for you to rear-end someone, miss a curve, or go through a stoplight. So now that we've heard all the bad things that can happen when I don't get enough sleep, how can I improve it? So let's go through some tips for better sleep. Probably the most important is building a very routine schedule. So this means going to bed and waking up the same time every day. This idea that I can deprive myself of sleep Monday through Friday and create a deficit of sleep and then make up for it on the weekend doesn't work. And it creates really poor patterns that our brain doesn't get accustomed to. So waking up and going to sleep the same time every day is very important. The second point is not to sleep in. So if you're struggling with sleep and tossing and turning, force yourself to wake up early at your usual time. The point of that is to be so tired that by the end of the day, you're ready to go to bed at your normal time. If you struggle with sleep at night, it's best to avoid napping. If you sleep really well at night, it's okay to nap. There isn't any bad thing that happens from napping anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes if you sleep well at night. But it's generally recommended, though, if you don't sleep well at night, don't nap during the day. The last important point, we want to build a very strong association in our brain that our bed is for sleep. So there's always a joke in sleep lectures that there's only 2 activities that happen in your bed, and they both begin with S, sleep and sex. So all the other things we do in our bed, our homework, our office work, watching TV, eating, whatever else you might do in bed, all those things are breaking that association that our bed is for sleep. What we want to have happen is when you lay in bed, your brain knows it's time to sleep, and it'll drive you to sleep even better. So now that we've established we need to go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time, the next tip is to start building a nice wind-down routine. In the late 1800s, something dramatically changed in how we live in our houses. We introduced electric lights. Now, instead of living by the sun, which when it gets dark, that starts to trigger our brain that it's time to go to sleep, we have the ability to create daylight all hours of the night. So, starting your wind-down routine, start dimming the lights around your house about an hour and a half to 2 hours before bed. Start turning off TV screens and tablets about an hour before bed. And I'll talk a little bit more about technology in a couple slides. So you have all this found time. You have an hour before bed of no TV and less lights. What are we going to do with this time? This is what we're going to fill it with, is all the stuff that we feel like we never have time for. Maybe some reading, maybe talking with our spouse, maybe stretching, maybe some prayer or thoughtful journaling. Fill it with things that relax us. The next tip seems obvious, but having a good quality sleep environment. So we want a nice, quiet, dark, and cool room, and the best sleep is really found around 65 degrees. For our bodies to fall asleep, our bodies naturally want to cool down about 1 or 2 degrees, and which is why we often find it easier to fall asleep in a cool room than a hot room. Make sure you have a nice, comfortable mattress, and let's remove some of the disruptors. This might be pets, this might be kids in our bed, and we might even have a snoring partner that wakes us up throughout the night. Some people are adopting that 1950s sitcom thought of separate beds or separate rooms. Our sleep is that important that might be useful to you. And the last step, again, we'll talk about more in a couple slides, is removing technology. There are some daily habits that actually help improve our sleep as well. When we exercise every day, that helps us sleep better. But it's best not to vigorously exercise 2 hours prior to sleep. This can heat up our body, which again makes it more difficult to fall asleep. We want to avoid alcohol. If you struggle with sleep, alcohol can make it worse. What alcohol does to our sleep is it disrupts that REM sleep. So we're less likely to be prepared tomorrow and decrease that mental health rock tumbler that's built into our brain. If you struggle with sleep, you also probably want to start avoiding caffeine. In some people, it can take over 12 hours to break down all the caffeine in a cup of coffee. So that 9 a.m. cup of coffee still might be in you at 9 p.m. I had mentioned on several slides some of the dangers of technology. When we use our tablets or watch TV prior to bed, they found that this decreases melatonin in our brain. And melatonin is one of the chemicals that our brain makes that helps drive better sleep. Having tablets and phones around prior to sleep also has been shown to decrease that REM sleep. Again, the REM sleep being useful for our mental health and forming memories tomorrow. Having technology in the bedroom also leads to what we call sleep procrastination. We've all laid in bed and wanted to watch one more YouTube video or check out one more person on social media. And this can lead to delaying your sleep, even if you know you're tired. We can also form a dependency on our technology. There was one study that found teenagers that have phones in their room, more than 25% of them wake up in the middle of the night to check social media. Having tablets and phones in our room can also create an anxiety. We can't wait to check the news. We can't wait to check social media. And these things can sometimes wake us up early. The last thing that's a danger of having technology in the bedroom is it can be noisy. It can buzz, it can ding, it can ring, and it'll wake you up in the middle of the night. If you're interested in learning more about sleep, a great resource is anything by Dr. Matthew Walker. He has a PhD in sleep science and runs a sleep science lab. He wrote a great book called Why We Sleep, so I highly recommend that. We're also looking for any lecture that he's given. He's given a number of TED Talks on sleep, and they're all fantastic. So if you want to learn more, please check out anything by him. And he has a great closing quote, I think, for us. He says, "I feel very comfortable saying that one of the best preventive actions that you can take on the basis of science right now is to start to capitalize on your sleep at night." So if you're laying there at night having poor night's sleep, I urge you to start taking some of these steps to try to improve. And don't get frustrated. Changing our sleep is one of the hardest things to do. So if you don't have success the first night, keep at it. This process can take weeks or months. But I know the more time you spend doing this, improving your sleep will only benefit you in the long run. Thank you for your time. Again, my name is Dr. Peter Nelson. Have a great day.